Everyone feared the Alpha King's dragon, until she healed it and became his chosen bride. Nobody in the entire kingdom went near the dragon's keep. Not the soldiers, not the servants, not even the bravest warriors who had fought in real wars and come home with scars to prove it. The keep was a sealed-off wing of the royal fortress, and behind its iron doors lived Scourge, the Alpha King's dragon. Everyone knew the name. Everyone feared it. They said the dragon had gone mad. They said it breathed black fire that didn't just burn your skin. It burned something deeper. 11 healers had been sent in to try and calm it. None of them ever fully recovered. 2 never spoke again. The people of Ashvale didn't talk about it much anymore. They just accepted it the way you accept a storm. Something powerful, something dangerous, something you stay far away from. The king himself, Isilam, was not much easier to be around. He ruled the entire kingdom with a face like stone and a voice that didn't invite questions. He was tall, dark-haired, and carried an old scar along the left side of his jaw that most people were too afraid to ask about. His court was filled with nobles and advisors and generals, but none of them would call him a friend. He didn't want friends. He wanted order. He wanted distance. He had been living behind that distance for a very long time. Far away from all of this, in a small border village called Ashfen, there was a young woman named Sarah. She had no pack, no title, no land, and no powerful family behind her name. What she had was a gift, a quiet, strange, almost impossible to explain ability to feel pain in living things. Not her own pain, the pain of others. Animals, mostly. She had healed a farmer's dog that 3 other healers had given up on, simply by sitting with it and listening. She couldn't always explain how she knew what was wrong. She just felt it, like a pressure in her chest that guided her hands. When the royal herald rode into Ashfen with the king's decree, the whole village came out to listen. The king was calling every healer in the land to the palace. Whoever could calm the dragon and figure out what was wrong with it would receive land, a title, and the king's personal gratitude. The warning was short and honest. The dragon was dangerous. No one was forcing anyone to go. Most healers with any sense sent polite letters explaining why they were too busy, too old, or too important to risk their lives. Sarah had no such excuses. She also had no invitation. Packless people weren't on any official list. But she packed a single bag that same evening and started walking. Her neighbor watched her go and called out from the doorstep, asking why she would do something so dangerous. Sarah thought about it for a moment and said, because something that big shouldn't have to hurt alone. Then she kept walking. She arrived at the palace gates 3 days later, dusty from the road, wearing plain wool clothing that did not impress anyone. The guards turned her away without even checking her name. She stood at the gate and waited, not saying much, not demanding anything, just waiting. The way she waited with animals who weren't ready to trust yet. It was the king's younger sister, Mira, who noticed her. Mira was sharp-eyed and had a soft heart she kept mostly hidden from the court. She saw Sarah standing at the gate with that particular kind of stillness. Not defeat, not protest, just patience. And something about it made her stop. 10 minutes of conversation later, Mira had smuggled Sarah inside as her personal attendant. It was a small rebellion. Mira was good at those. The other healers were preparing their tools in the staging hall. Big leather cases full of vials, instruments, charts, expensive things. Sarah prepared nothing. When the head healer, an older woman named Thessaly, asked what her method was, Sarah said she needed to listen to the dragon first. The entire room laughed. Sarah didn't. She had heard that laugh before. It didn't change anything. King Calum appeared briefly to acknowledge the group. He looked at the line of healers the way someone looks at a problem they no longer believe can be solved. He had done this before. He had hoped before. He had stopped hoping a few rounds ago. He looked at Sarah last, said nothing, and left. The healers went into the keep one by one, in order of rank. It did not go well. The dragon destroyed the instruments of the first, chased the second out with a burst of black fire, and fell into a violent shaking episode that injured the third and fourth before the guards could pull them out. Outside the keep, the air smelled like ash and fear. Sarah was last. She wasn't even officially on the list, and Thessaly tried once more to object. Mira overruled her with a calm that suggested she had been practicing. Calum, watching from the iron platform above the keep floor, simply watched to see what would happen. Sarah walked in alone. The dragon was enormous, black-scaled, breathing in ragged bursts, his eyes lit with something between rage and agony. Sarah did not approach him. She walked to the middle of the floor, sat down cross-legged on the scorched black ground, and went very still. Scourge snarled. She didn't move. He circled. She breathed. He came closer, head low, teeth visible. She kept breathing. After several long minutes, she started to hum. It wasn't a song, really. More like a sound you'd make when you're simply present somewhere and not trying to do anything at all. Scourge slowed. His circling stopped. He stood a few meters away and watched her with those burning eyes, and something in the shape of him changed. Like a fist, very slightly unclenching. Up on the platform, Calum leaned forward. He had watched 11 people go into that keep with plans and tools and training. Not one of them had thought to simply sit down. She came out an hour later, unharmed. She told Calum what she had felt during the session. The dragon wasn't violent because he wanted to be. He was in constant, unbearable pain. A deep, embedded kind of pain. Like something was lodged inside him that had been there a very long time. She would need multiple sessions to understand it fully. She would need time. Calum was skeptical. His royal healers had found nothing like that. He asked her credentials. She had none. He asked her pack. She had none. He was almost certainly about to send her away, when Scourge, from somewhere within the keep, made a sound. Low, resonant, unlike anything the guards had heard before. Not a threat. Almost like a request. Calum gave her 1 week. She would stay in the servants' quarters, go to the keep each morning, and have no access to the rest of the palace. She would not interact with the court or with him directly. He walked away before she could respond. That was how he operated. Give the instruction, leave the room, don't let anyone see you second-guessing yourself. Over the next 5 days, Sarah learned Scourge the way she had always learned animals, slowly, with no agenda. She learned when he was restless versus when he was in real pain. She learned that he hated loud sounds, but was calmed by low ones. By the 3rd day, she was sitting with her back against his side, one hand resting on his scales, feeling the way the pain moved through him like a current. She couldn't remove the pain yet. She wasn't strong enough to do that alone, but she could redirect it. Give him short windows of relief, the way you ease pressure from a wound before properly treating it. Each morning she arrived, and each morning Scourge was waiting at the far end of the keep. And each morning he let her a little closer than before. Calum watched every session from the platform above. He told himself it was his responsibility to observe. He told himself he was watching for safety. He was not doing either of those things. He was watching her. The way she moved, the way she never rushed, the way she seemed completely unafraid of something that had terrified everyone else. He didn't know what to do with that, so he kept watching. On the 4th day, he came down to the keep floor himself. He said he needed to observe more closely. Sarah said nothing. She simply moved a little to one side to make room. For almost an hour, the Alpha King of Ashvale sat on scorched black ground, next to a young woman with no title, no pack, and no particular credentials, and watched her work. He had not sat on the floor in years. He hadn't noticed how much he missed being at the level of living things. That day, Sarah reached a little too far with her gift, the way you might overstep while stretching. She touched the edge of the bond between Calum and the dragon, the invisible thread that tied an Alpha King to his bonded creature, and felt what was there. It hit her hard. The pain she felt wasn't just Scourge's. It was Calum's too, echoing through the bond like a second heartbeat. Grief, loneliness, a guilt he had been carrying so long he had stopped noticing the weight. She pulled back quickly. He saw her face change. He didn't ask what happened. She didn't explain. But something in the air between them was different after that, and neither of them pretended otherwise. The trouble came from inside the court. A counselor named Drex had been watching Sarah's progress with growing worry, not because he feared the dragon, but because a healthy dragon meant an unbeatable king. Drex had been quietly building influence in the cracks left by Calum's distance. A healed Scourge would close those cracks permanently. So Drex did what men like Drex always do. When they can't beat something honestly, he tried to bury it in suspicion. He filed a formal accusation with the council, claiming Sarah was using dark magic, that she was a spy, that she was dangerous. Calum called her in for an audience, the first time they had been in the same room and actually spoken to each other. He told her about the accusation plainly and watched her face. She wasn't scared. She looked tired. The way you look when people have been doubting you your whole life, and you're simply done being surprised by it. She said quietly that she had nothing to hide, that she had only been sitting with what others refused to sit with, and if that was a crime in this kingdom, she would leave. She started to stand. He told her to sit back down. Then he dismissed the accusation, without consulting the council at all. Drex was furious. Calum's general, Varric, a man who trusted no one quickly, watched the whole exchange from the corner of the room and said nothing. But something shifted in his expression. On the sixth day, Sarah went deep enough to finally understand the full shape of what was wrong. It wasn't a general curse or a vague magical darkness. It was specific. A shard of obsidian, small and sharp, and enchanted with something old and deliberately cruel, lodged between the dragon's ribs. It had been there for 31 years. She brought this to Calum privately that evening. He went very still when she said the number. 31 years ago, his father had been killed in a border attack. Scourge had been struck the same night. Calum had grown up watching his dragon suffer, and never knowing why, assuming it was grief, assuming it was the bond breaking down, assuming it was somehow his fault for not being enough to hold things together. He had been carrying that for his entire adult life, and the dragon had literally been carrying the weapon. He turned away. Sarah could see from the line of his shoulders what was happening. She didn't look away, didn't offer soft words, didn't try to smooth over the moment. She just stayed, the same way she had stayed in the keep that first day. After a long silence, he turned back. His voice was quiet. He asked if it could be removed. She said yes, but not by her alone. She needed him in the keep. The removal would be painful for Scourge, and the dragon would only stay calm if his bonded alpha was there with him. He said yes before she finished the sentence. That night, Mira found Sarah in the corridor, unable to sleep. They talked for the first time like real people rather than visitor and host. Mira told her things about the court, about how it ran on fear, about how Calum had been closing himself off since the night his father died, about how the whole palace had learned to work around his silence instead of through it. Then Mira said something quietly that Sarah didn't respond to but didn't forget. I think my brother has been waiting for someone who sees him the same way you see that dragon. The morning of the 7th day, they walked into the keep together. Sarah had asked that the guards stay outside. Their presence made Scourge nervous. It was just the three of them, the healer, the king, and the dragon, who had been in pain for longer than either of them had been alive. What followed was the hardest thing Sarah had ever done. She pushed her gift deeper than she ever had before, using it like a thread to find the shard and isolate it from the surrounding tissue. Meanwhile, Calum kept one hand on Scourge's jaw and talked to him, low and steady and continuous, a voice Sarah had never heard him use before, gentle, almost like the voice of someone who had once been soft and still remembered how. Halfway through, Scourge convulsed. His tail swept across the keep like a battering ram and hit Sarah sideways into the stone wall. She hit hard. Calum was across the floor in 3 steps. She was conscious, one shoulder screaming in pain, and she told him she had to keep going. If she stopped now, the enchantment would seal itself back, and they would never get another chance. He looked at her for 1 second, and then he did something that surprised them both. He knelt beside her and held out his hand. Not to help her up, as an anchor. Something to hold on to. She took it, and she kept going. The shard released with a sound like cracking ice. Scourge screamed, a sound so big it shook dust from the ceiling and brought the guards hammering on the door. Then silence. Then breathing. Slow, even, real breathing. The kind that comes after long pain finally stops. The dragon lowered his enormous head to the ground between them and closed his eyes. Calum was still holding her hand. He realized it a few seconds after it was over and let go carefully, like he wasn't sure when that had started. Sarah looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed saying. Not yet. News of what happened spread through the palace the way news always does. Fast, and slightly wrong in the details, but right in the important parts. The dragon was calm. The dragon had been healed. Scourge, who had been the kingdom's great unspoken shame for 3 decades, was sleeping peacefully in the keep and letting stable hands bring him food. Drex made one final move, brought the accusation against Sarah before the full council, while Calum was elsewhere. Calum walked in midway through. He listened for about 60 seconds. Then he removed Drex from the council entirely, not for the accusation itself, but for the specific cowardice of timing it for when the king's back was turned. He addressed the remaining council briefly. Sarah was under his personal protection, and that was the end of the conversation. He left. He did not tell Sarah any of this. Mira did. That evening, Sarah went to find Calum on the ramparts. He was standing there looking at the mountains in the distance, the way people do when they're trying to think, and also trying not to. She stood beside him. Neither spoke for a while, but it was the comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that had been building for 7 days. She told him she was planning to go back to Ashfen. Her work was done. The reward he had promised, land, title, she didn't want them. He turned to look at her then, fully, without the armor his face usually wore. He asked what she did want. She said honestly that she wasn't sure. She had spent so long paying attention to other people's pain that she'd never stopped to figure out what she needed for herself. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Stay. Figure it out here." She asked if that was an order. He said no. He said it was the first real request he'd made of anyone in a very long time. She stayed. The weeks that followed were quieter than anyone expected. Scourge continued to heal, slowly, the way deep wounds heal, from the inside out. Calum continued to change in ways the court noticed before they understood what they were seeing. He began attending meals. He stopped canceling meetings with Mira. He laughed once in the great hall, a real laugh, short and a little startled, like he had forgotten he could do that, and the entire room went awkwardly silent, because none of them had ever heard it before. Sarah was given proper quarters near the keep, and began working alongside the royal healers as an equal. Thessaly, to her credit, eventually asked to learn her methods. It was not easy for her to ask. Sarah taught her anyway. In Ashvale, the choosing ceremony was not a celebration arranged by advisors or a political agreement between families. It was the Alpha King, standing before his court and naming his chosen, the one person he chose for life, not for alliance, not for bloodline, not because it was expected. It was irrevocable. It was real. Calum called the court together one afternoon, without any advance notice. There was no long speech, no dramatic presentation. He walked to the center of the hall, looked at Sarah across the room. This packless girl from Ashfen who had walked to his gates uninvited, sat on his burned floor, and healed 31 years of quiet agony with nothing but patience and presence, and he held out his hand. He said her name. That was all. She crossed the room and took his hand. The court knelt. Mira was crying and not bothering to hide it. Varric, standing near the back, was definitely not crying. But his jaw was very tight, and his eyes were doing something unusual. She had not walked through those palace gates to become a queen. She hadn't even thought that far ahead. She had gone because she could feel something in pain, and no one else was going to sit with it. That was the whole reason. And somehow, from that single, quiet act of choosing not to walk away, everything else had followed. The king, the court, the crown, a home she hadn't known she was looking for. A man who had finally learned how to ask. That is what they do not tell you about healing. It is not always dramatic. It does not always look like a miracle. Sometimes it looks like sitting down on a burned floor and humming softly, until something that was broken remembers it. Doesn't have to be.